Our registered participants are here. Thank you all for your promptness. It's very exciting. So, hi everyone. Welcome to the second month of the Why Should I Visit webinars. And this month, we are going to Southwest England. And in particular, we are headed to Devon and Cornwall. And we'll look at a map in just a minute here. So this will go, 30, 40 minutes. As we go through the webinar here, feel free to put questions into the question and answer widget down at the bottom somewhere, like right about here. And feel free to put stuff in chat as well. I'll look at the chat sort of as we get into the Q&A at the end. And otherwise, sit back, relax. You're not being recorded. Your camera's off, your microphone's off. You don't have to pay attention if you don't want to. I'm never going to know. I really appreciate you being here, though. So you've done your part already. I've also taken some of your feedback from last month, so I'll have more maps this time. Make sure you all know what we're talking about as we go through the presentation. And I've done my best to quiet my mouse down so it's not making a lot of noise as I mouse around. But I may have to take a time machine back to the 1990s and invest in an actual mouse pad. And for you, I would do that. So let's get started talking about Southwest England. And specifically, we're talking about this bit, the bit sort of highlighted in purple here, Devon and Cornwall down in that little peninsula that juts out. And you see London there. You've got Scotland going up to the north, just to give you some orientation here. And I wanted to talk about this one because we just took a trip to Southwest England. But I think it's probably not on the radar for a lot of, in particular, Americans traveling to the UK. I think it's pretty common, obviously, London, maybe Wales, maybe the Cotswolds, Garden District, and then sort of doing a grand tour of the UK up through Scotland and then maybe over to Ireland. And, that's an amazing trip to do, and certainly I wouldn't dissuade anyone from doing that. But on your second visit to the UK, don't rule out this little corner of the UK, because I think it's actually a pretty delightful place. And as we'll talk about, there's just a ton of really cool opportunities to be had, really cool experiences to be had in the southwest of England. So what's our agenda? Well, first off, I'll give you my high-level elevator pitch about why you'll love Southwest England. Then I'll go through some sort of activities that you might do on a trip, how you might be moving around, that sort of thing. We'll talk about some of the logistics to keep in mind if this sounds like a trip you might want to do. And then we'll wrap up with your questions and hopefully my answers at the end. So why are you going to love Southwest England? Okay, first off, it's stunningly beautiful, otherworldly beautiful. And it's empty, comparatively empty. And so from a sort of nature, hiking, exploration perspective, there's just really cool stuff to be seen, very different kinds of landscapes than what you'd find in parks in the US here. And just a really cool opportunity to be out and explore a really large, sort of natural park environment and explore on your own and see just some absolutely stunningly beautiful landscapes that really don't, only exist in sort of, Victorian paintings. And it turns out in reality in Southwest England. So, that's definitely going to be your prime reason you're going to be going, is just jaw-dropping views. But if you're a nerd, you also are probably going to be really excited to be in the hotbed of fossil hunting and sort of the Jurassic era. And we're going to be talking about how you can actually go do your own fossil hunting in this area, and sort of the important historical connections and sort of important role that this part of England served in modern paleontology and the theory of evolution. And finally, this is an opportunity to engage in, ye olde English village life in a way that is ultra authentic. you're going to be exploring villages that are not oriented around sort of tourist crowds or day trippers coming in from London on the train, but villages that are just villages. They've always been villages. They're still villages, and they're happy to see you and a little confused about why you're there. So if that's the kind of experience you're really excited about in the UK, you're going to love this part of England. So what are you going to do on your trip to Southwest England that you're now certainly committed to doing? Well, I think the most important thing to get out of the way first is, oh, sorry, I skipped a slide. We're going to be talking specifically about these two areas of Southwest England in particular. We're going to be talking about the area around Dartmoor National Park, which is this sort of 1,000 square kilometer national park. And we're going to talk about what that means in the sort of British context. And then we're going to be talking about the Jurassic Coast, which is this long stretch of coastline from Exmouth sort of all the way over to Poole on the coast in the Southwest. I'm talking about these two regions because that's where we spent most of our time on our trip. And as we get towards the end, I'll also talk about some of the exploration you might want to think about doing, going even further down south and exploring further of this part of England. So you probably get the sense from looking at the map, you're going to be driving a lot. And that's probably the biggest thing to get out of the way first if you're thinking about a trip to Southwest England, is this is not a trip you're going to be able to do sort of leveraging trains and buses, intercity buses, that sort of thing. There's lots of great experiences to be had in the UK where you can really stick to public transportation, or maybe public transportation supplemented with a few rideshare services. But this part of England, you're really going to want your own car, and you're going to be doing a fair amount of driving. And I know that can be kind of intimidating, I think, for a lot of Americans, the idea of going to the UK and driving on the other side of the road, the other side of the car, maybe driving a manual transmission car that you might not drive super frequently back home. And I totally understand that. I think there's a couple things working in your favor. One, there's not going to be a lot of traffic you're going to be fighting. Once you've gotten sort of out of London and gotten in this part of the country, things are pretty quiet. You can move at your own pace. You're going to be on a lot of very quiet back lanes. I'd also encourage you, as you're thinking about planning your trip, make sure you give yourself a few days to get your time zones adjusted, get your body adjusted, get your brain rebooted a little bit. I don't think I'd personally want to sort of land in London jet lagged and immediately hop in a car and, fight rush hour traffic getting out of London while trying to remember which side of the road to drive on. So plan a trip that there's no one's ever going to complain about spending a couple of days in London. So spend a couple of days in London getting acclimated before you jump in that car. I don't think it's as intimidating as a lot of people might think it's going to be. And be patient, be polite, take your time, and you'll do fine. And your reward for being willing to drive in this part of the country, not only is that you get to explore it, but you get to drive roads like this, right? Again, just stunning views off in the distance. You're driving on this narrow one lane sort of farm road surrounded by these tall hedgerows with farm fields on either side, or ancient farmhouses, going through amazing hills and curves, and once you're into it, really having the time of your life. And we'll talk in the logistics section about some things to keep in mind when you're thinking about a car for this trip. So you've gotten your car, you've left London, your brain's reset, you've sort of acclimated a little bit to the time zone, you've made it down here. Where's your first stop? Your first stop's going to be Dartmoor. And I'll admit to you, I'm going to admit a few things about this trip that we took, wherein we did not do a ton of planning and hadn't put a ton of thought into where it was we're going. And one of the first things, one of the first ways in which that came up is we'd done a little bit of looking into Dartmoor, but I hadn't really ever parsed that last four letters of the name, Moor, right? We sort of, as Americans, we know about moors, and I think, for me, when I think about a moor, I think about maybe misty, foggy, slightly boggy, cold, spooky, Hound of the Baskervilles stuff. I don't know if that's necessarily, I don't know where that comes from, but if you ask me to sort of describe a moor, that's probably what I'd come up with. And That definitely exists in Dartmoor. Dartmoor has a lot going on though. And it's not all like that. But if that's the experience you're looking for, you can definitely have that sort of more experience in Dartmoor. One of the big things to understand about Dartmoor, though, is that a UK national park is not the same thing as a US national park. And that is in your favor, to my mind. So we're going to look at a map here of Dartmoor National Park. And I know you can't really read all the labels. That's not going to be important here. But as I said, it's about 1,000 square kilometers. So, you know, a pretty big park by most of the world standards. I believe that, you know, the folks out in Yellowstone would probably laugh at it, but it's 1,000 square kilometers. It's a lot of kilometers. I think that's still a lot of miles, as best I understand it. But there's some important things to understand here. First off, just looking at this map, you notice it's crisscrossed by some different roads. But there's an area up here that doesn't have a lot of roads going on. That part of Dartmoor National Park is owned by Prince Charles in the way that sort of princes own things in the UK, which I don't profess to understand. I believe there's a very popular TV show that probably explains that. But Prince Charles does not come and hang out here because actually it's a military firing range. And so you don't do a lot of hiking in that area on account of the military firing range part. But, you know, you sort of get the idea. This is a national park, but like a big swath of it is, you know, kind of off limits. The other things you would notice if you were able to zoom in on this map and actually poke around is there's all kinds of stuff here that we don't expect to find in a national park, like villages and farms and, you know, stores and bed and breakfasts and all kinds of stuff. Because of course, you know, there's been stuff happening in this area for thousands and thousands of years: mining, farming, industrial uses, you know, water redirection and commerce. And the national park is a relatively modern overlay on top of that. And so all of those historical uses are sort of encapsulated within the park. And to my mind, that makes it a really, really fun experience because, you know, I think we've all had that experience of, you know, you sort of go into a big national park and now you're sort of, you're in the playground, right? And you know, you're in the walled garden, you know that all the food is going to be sort of the same and the housing is going to be the same more or less. And, you know, this is sort of a national park, but you still get to have that fun village experience, that fun exploration experience, and meet people who actually live there as well. So one of the really cool things about that is that you can stay in the park and you can stay somewhere awesome in the park. So as an example, here's where we stayed. This is an Airbnb. It was a barn, sort of I think a hay barn or something, because one side of it was the kind of thing that like opened wide and you might put big hay bales in, maybe, question mark. But it had been converted into a very, very cute Airbnb. The people who own it, they live in that bigger house behind. And the woman is an architect, and it shows. And so super, super cute space with this really neat like loft where we could hang out and drink coffee, and you can listen to the farm animals outside. And you see here, it came with a hammock. That's a cat, very happy in her hammock, and really cool seating area, et cetera. But, you know, this is just one example. Obviously, you don't need to stay here. You can choose whether, you know, are you the type of person who wants to stay as more of a farm stay, right? Stay on an active farm where you get the experience of helping out on the farm and seeing how that happens. Maybe you want to stay in a bed and breakfast. There's some amazing bed and breakfasts with the types of, you know, histories that we you know, don't even pretend to have in the United States, where, you know, this bed and breakfast served its first guest in 1653, that kind of thing. You've got, you know, self-catering cottages like this, small little inns as well. So you can pick the type of place you want to stay for whatever type of traveler you are, but you're going to be able to make connections with locals, have somewhere super cute as a home base. And one of the things I'd say is that you can really consider you know, if you pick a place in Dartmoor that you really love, that can be your home base for an entire trip through the southwest of England. You can get over to the Jurassic Coast, as we're going to talk about, you know, really easily, maybe an hour of driving. You can get further down south as well as day trips, totally reasonable. And so you can sort of pick a home base that's really great, move in, do some of your own cooking. We're going to talk about, farm stores and all the amazing produce that's available. And so definitely a highlight is finding somewhere awesome to stay. And you're also going to be doing a lot of hiking, right? A lot of wandering around. How do you figure out how to do that? Well, there's a couple things. First off, if you've ever talked to me about hiking, and I'll probably use this slide again in a future talk, maybe I'll update it, but AllTrails. AllTrails is my go-to app. It's an app for your smartphone or your tablet. You can use it on the web. And it is this amazing sort of community of people who mark trails and share their trail information. And anywhere you are in the world, you can pull up AllTrails and find just the most amazing trails to follow. And it has some really great features as well. One of the big ones, and we're going to talk about this in a minute, is it'll save your trails for offline use, so that if you don't have cell connectivity, you'll still get the map, you'll get the trail, you'll get the instructions, you'll get a compass, all those things that you want. You can also see reviews and photos left by previous people who've walked the trail, which can be really helpful if you sort of get to a crossing and you're not sure which way to go, and someone's helpfully posted a picture saying like, hey, this is the direction you want to go here. And if you happen to be like all in on the Apple ecosystem, they have a really cool watch app as well, where you can keep your phone in your pocket. And if you happen to wander off the trail, the phone will just sort of, the watch, I should say, will nudge your wrist, tap your wrist if you get a little too far off the trail. And then, it's time to take a look at your map and figure out what's gone wrong, so you don't have to be staring at your phone the whole time. So whether you're going to the southwest of England or not, I highly recommend installing AllTrails. I highly recommend paying the $30 a year or whatever they want for it, because it's a really great resource. I use it all the time. But if you're not into phones, or maybe you don't want to trust technology with your life, the other thing you will find if you start doing some research on this region is the Ordnance Survey maps, which are these amazing ultra detailed maps that are available for anywhere in the UK, or anywhere in England, at least. I think anywhere in the UK. And these are traditional like paper maps, map maps. And everyone's going to say, be sure you get your Ordnance Survey map, be sure you bring a compass, right? Which sounds like a little intense, a little dire, right? This is 2022. Why do I need a paper map and a compass, right? And then you're going to do some hikes where you're going to say, oh, I understand how someone could get absolutely completely lost and not be able to find their way back. Because when the fog moves in and all the hills look the same and you have no ability to see into the horizon, it's really easy to get lost in this place. So if you're going to trust your phone, that's great. I'd always recommend, anytime you're navigating, trusting your phone, you want to keep one of those pretty chunky USB battery packs in your backpack, because sometimes, phones go crazy. Sometimes they drain their battery and you don't realize it. And if you've got one of those USB power packs with you, you can always sort of charge your phone back up and at least navigate back to where you started, right? You might not be able to finish your hike, but you can at least have enough power to get back out. So I highly recommend that. If you prefer maps, and if you decide to go to this region, and if you happen to live in Minnesota, we'll loan you ours. But they're really fun to look at as well, because as you can sort of see, I just took a random screenshot of one of these Ordnance Survey maps. This isn't, some particularly special part of the park, but you'll see the disused tin workings and the cairn circle and cyst crossing. And, it's ultra detailed. Every single horse path, walking trail, cow path, canal, everything is marked out on these maps. You've got elevation information about what kind of landscape you're going to be walking through, like really boggy areas, that kind of thing. And they sort of set it in a really fun font as well. So Ordnance Survey maps are the other way you're going to navigate. Okay, we've talked a lot about like the what, but the how, but what is the what? What are you going to see? Well, okay, what you're going to see in Dartmoor are, first off, tors. And what's a tor? That's T-O-R. A tor is a sort of granite outcropping. Sometimes they're clustered, a few of them together. Sometimes it's just a single pillar, on the top of a hill, this single pillar that sort of almost looks like when you're on the beach and you sort of squish wet sand and make those towers. And what this is sort of, and knowing that there's a geologist listening makes me a little cautious about going into this part. But essentially, this is granite that had been completely buried, and over time, erosion removes all of the looser materials around the granite, the softer minerals and dirt and everything, leaving just these little bits of granite exposed. And then they get weathered further as well once they're exposed on these sort of very remote hilltops. And there are many of these throughout Dartmoor. They become real landscapes and real navigational markers for you as you're out on your hikes. And you can walk up to them, you can climb on them, you can scurry up to the top and have a picnic on top of one. These aren't sort of protected spaces in the way that they might be in a US national park. You're not fenced off from them. There are people who will be doing actual rock climbing on some of them. And they're really fun to come upon. And they've each got a name, and the names again sort of put you back to English literature. So there's hound tor and fox tor and hay tor and all these things. So you're going to see a lot of tors, but it's not all tors. You're going to have some really amazing lush landscapes that you're walking through as well. One of the things about Dartmoor is it's these rolling hills that create these microclimates. And so you've got sort of very sparse, arid parts of the park that are windswept. And then you dive into a valley and you get into this sort of ultra lush, area with ferns and all kinds of greenery and much warmer temperatures. And you're going to be exploring those. And then even sort of more intensely, there are a few areas where you get into ancient oak forests. And these get into sort of that eerie, I've never seen Game of Thrones, but I think this is probably evocative of things in Game of Thrones. I'm not sure I want to be here like during a thunderstorm on a moonless night. These very cool ancient oak forests where there's all kinds of amazing mosses and lichens that are growing on every surface. You have to be very, very careful not to touch or step on any of those. You move very gingerly because it takes hundreds of years for some of these lichen to grow, and one wrong footprint can wipe that out. But it's a really, really special place to be able to explore, and the type of thing that almost doesn't exist anywhere anymore. And there are a few of those still within Dartmoor that you can go and hike to and spend some time in. So the other really amazing thing about hiking in Dartmoor, as I said, is that you've got this long human history within the park. So you're not just going to be seeing these natural features, you're also going to see the impacts of humans, both really ancient and more modern. So on the left here is an example of a granite railway that was carved into the rock. And this was to facilitate tin mining, primarily tin mining and granite quarrying. And this was in use in the sort of 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. And what they would do is literally, you can sort of make it out here. There's essentially some rails that are carved into the rock, and then they would use carts that would be sort of drawn by a pack animal. They were very careful to make sure there was a very gentle downward slope all the way to a canal or a port or somewhere where the materials they were quarrying or mining could be offloaded and taken for further processing. And these are not sort of, again, these are just, now they're trails that you wander on, or you might cross them. They're all over, sometimes in pretty intense sort of curves and not spirals, but big dropping areas when they're coming off of a mountain, sometimes very long, straight like this, where it's just a very gentle downhill curve. And then on the right, so this is sort of on the left, that's sort of maybe, 1700s, 1800s, that kind of time frame, a little earlier as well. On the right, then, sometimes you're out wandering and you just come across a thing that on your Ordnance Survey map just says medieval village, right? And this is what it is. It's a medieval village. There's not an interpretive sign. There aren't didactics. There's, not someone with pamphlets leading tours. It's just, here's a medieval village. And you stand there and you say, I'm in a medieval village. And then maybe later on you go home and read in a guidebook or read online about what the heck it actually was. But you get that sense of, there's this really long history of human habitation and human use of the landscape, and that's left its trace in all these different ways. You can also, and I don't have a great photo of this, but you can actually see in the way that some of the terraces were built dating back to sort of Roman times, you'll see evidence of farms and hedgerows and things that date way, way, way back. So you're going to see a lot of that. And you're also going to see evidence of sort of the modern humans who are still working this land and still farming this land, which is, first off, you're going to see a lot of horses that are just out wandering the moors. Don't walk up to the horses. They do not want to be your friend. But and I'm not a horse person, but I gather they are very cool horses if you are a horse person. And they wander free, but they are taken care of. So once a year, they're sort of rounded up, given any medication, and I believe sometimes sort of sold to people who are very interested in special horses. But the rest of the time, they live their lives just exploring, wandering, being free. And I would gather occasionally, maybe, kicking a tourist. And that's why you don't get too close to one of them. You're also going to see a lot of sheep. Here on the right here is a sheep that was standing in our path. And we just said, Mr. Sheep, would you leave? And eventually he did. Again, the sheep just roam free. Occasionally you might see a farmer with his dog sort of rounding them up for the night, or bringing them in, but otherwise the sheep, it's their land, not yours. You're just going to run into sheep occasionally. And you'll also see a lot of cows. Again, don't get too close to cows, especially the big ones that look a little murdery. They're fun to look at from a distance, less fun if they think that you're a threat to them. But they're out there wandering around on the trails. If they're blocking the trail, you can wait, or you can take a different route. You're probably not going to get them to move, though. So a lot of that kind of wildlife, or not wildlife, animal life on the moors. And again, I picked these pictures in part to show you the animals, but I hope you're seeing like these landscapes are pretty amazing, especially this landscape with the sheep. Again, just, could be a painting, and the type of painting that, you only see in England, right? So what if these animals are a little too cosmopolitan for you? Well, you can also do stuff like walk with llamas. And this is an example of the wide range of activities that are available within Dartmoor. So walking with llamas, these are some really nice people, a husband and wife. They've got some llamas, some alpacas. They were raising them for, their fur. Yeah, fur, hair, whatever, the fuzzy stuff that's on llamas, to make yarn and that sort of thing. And they decided to start taking people on hikes. And the way it works is you show up in a parking lot and everyone gets their own llama. You don't have to share a llama. You can each have your own llama. And you go for a walk across the moor, and you hear about the history of the area and the flora and the fauna. You learn about how to take care of a llama and what it's looking for, and how to make sure it doesn't eat anything that's going to upset its tummy. Halfway through the hike, they give you scones and tea that they brought with you, and then you go back. That's the experience. That's walking with llamas. And these people were amazing, and they've lived on this land. Well, they don't know how long they've lived on this land, because the records for the house they live in only goes back to the 1500s, but probably longer than that, right? And it was a really great connection to make. But if llamas aren't your thing, you can do rock climbing, you can do, horseback riding, you can go on all kinds of guided hikes, night walks, that sort of thing. There's all kinds of amazing biking to be done in the park as well. So whatever sort of outdoor recreational activity you're into, you're going to find it within the park. And again, because it's not in the sort of US sense, it's this park that has lots of people living in it. You're going to be working with locals who just like to show you around sort of their neighborhood, essentially, which happens to be the park. And I guess at this point, you're probably asking yourself, what if I'm out on this hike and I've been hiking all day and I've seen tours and I've seen sheep and I've seen, medieval villages. What if I need cake? Well, okay. That's like, again, the really great thing about being in Dartmoor is that you don't have to go to the official government restaurant and eat, government issued nachos. There's like farm stands and cafes in the park. And so both of these are examples of, snacks we had after finishing a hike. And it wasn't that we got in a car and, drove 30 minutes. It's like we literally finished the hike at a cafe and they handed us scones and coffee. So on the left here, you see a sort of traditional English tea time thing with cakes and scones and tea. This was at a really, really cool farm store. And there's a number of these throughout Dartmoor where they've got a little restaurant that has, tea, and then they have some other dishes as well if you need a meal. And then they've got a butcher that's selling meat that's been raised and slaughtered within Dartmoor. They're selling cheese, again, same deal. They're selling wine, grown in that area, or grapes grown in that area. All, grains and all kinds of other things that are all coming from Dartmoor and Southwest England. So you can go to these farm stores and load up with everything you need to take back to your really cool Airbnb and do all your cooking. Or you can just get some cakes and sandwiches and scones. And then on the right here, this is an example from, it's actually a bed and breakfast. And it's, again, one of these super ancient bed and breakfasts. And they have a little restaurant cafe. And so you finish your hike, you sort of walk under an old bridge and pop out in their patio or their parking lot, really, and get some scones with your clotted cream and your strawberry jam and a nice tea or coffee, and sit and think about that amazing hike you just had. So for me, as someone who's very food motivated, knowing that my hike is going to end with this type of thing is definitely a highlight of being there. So hopefully that's gotten you excited about Dartmoor, but Southwest England is way more than just Dartmoor. And so I want to move on to talking about the Jurassic Coast. You'll understand why we say weekends only in a moment. So again, we're talking about this sort of region of coastline that dates from or the ranges from sort of Exeter or Exmouth over in the west, all the way over towards Poole. And I've got a more zoomed in map we'll look at in a minute as we talk about what this landscape is all about, because this is a landscape that's seen some stuff. This picture might give you a sense. The Jurassic Coast is a sort of geological marvel. It is where a lot of our sort of modern understanding of paleontology and evolution got a real jump start. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But what you can see here and why this is so important is you see the angle of the cliffs here. So these were, sort of deposited layers of limestone that got deposited over time from, as we know, waves bringing material in, and it settles, and eventually so you build up layers. But then all of those layers get smushed and shifted and tilted through geologic action, geologic forces, tectonic forces. And that brings all of these materials up to the surface, exposes them for us to find them. And you get these very, very dramatic cliffside surfaces where you can just see the action of the earth right in front of your eyes. So a really cool thing to see. So let's look at this map. And what I did is I sort of recorded a video zoomed in on the map because that was the best way I could figure out to bring it into our video here tonight. So, oh, and of course it's not going to let me pause, is it? Well, that's annoying. The Jurassic Coast sort of stretches from Exmouth, as I said, and when you're in Exmouth, unfortunately, it doesn't want to pause anymore, but when you're in Exmouth, you're looking at rocks that are about 250 million years old. And then as you move from the west over to the east, you're going to be moving from 250 million years ago all the way up to about 65 million years ago. So you move through almost 200 million years of Earth history as you drive along this coastline and do hikes along this coastline. So as I pan across here, we're moving from sort of now 200 million years ago here as we move in here, and we're going to talk about Lyme Regis in a moment. And then you move into sort of Weymouth, and we're going to talk about these regions over here, Dirtle Door and Man of War Cove and the fossil forest. And then by the time you get to Poole, you're all the way to 65 million years ago. So that's why they call it the Jurassic Coast. It's this huge range of time, and you're able to access and explore these things. So, oh, no, there we go. And when I say explore, I literally mean you can go out and go get fossils and go look at this stuff and take them home. This isn't like a do not touch sort of environment. So what is the Jurassic Coast all about? Well, you may have heard of someone named Mary Anning. She is this super avid fossil hunter who lived in the 19th century, lived in this part, lived in Lyme Regis, and she would go down to the beach and look at the rocks, look at these sort of deposits, and she was finding all kinds of amazing creatures. And she was a very diligent fossil hunter and cataloger who didn't get much credit for many years. But of course, these fossils then made their way into the sort of Victorian scientific establishment and were big contributors to sort of thinking about paleontology, thinking about evolution. She was sort of the originator of the study of fossilized poop or corpelites. And you can go and do the same thing she did, because what the British have realized is all of this stuff is exposed to the forces of the ocean. They get big storms coming in here that just rip away chunks of the cliffside. And so they know it doesn't matter if a tourist comes in and takes some rocks home, because the next storm that comes through is going to take millions of pounds of this stuff away. And in fact, it's actually better if a tourist comes in and does this, because maybe they're going to find a cool fossil and hopefully they'll bring it to the museum in Lyme Regis and say, hey, I found this fossil. Have you ever seen one of these before? And so they've essentially created a citizen science project where they've crowdsourced fossil hunting, made it something people are allowed to do instead of something that's forbidden, and we all get to benefit. So if you stop into the museum in Lyme Regis, which is right on the harbor, you're not going to miss it. They'll have a little sign that tells you, based on the tides and things like that, the best time to go fossil hunting. Apparently, the very best time to be there is right after a storm has come through, because of course it's going to expose all kinds of new rocks that haven't been already picked over. But if you're an amateur fossil hunter, you can just plop yourself down on the beach, start grabbing rocks and sort of split them open. They're very, very soft. They just split apart very easily. And quickly, you start to find fossils. Here's an example of one that we found. We found all kinds of really cool stuff. It's a very soothing activity. So Lyme Regis and the Jurassic Coast is great. If you don't want to do fossil hunting, though, it is an actual beach. If sort of British seaside, life is something you've always dreamed of, if you've, read a lot of Victorian literature of that type, it's a beach. You can get a towel and an umbrella and come and plop yourself down here and get a Mr. Whippy ice cream and enjoy a beautiful day at the beach. And there are some absolutely stunning locations along the Jurassic Coast. Again, on the right here, this is, I believe, Man o' War Cove, which is next to another cove called Dirtle Door. And these are, again, this is a beach you can bring your stuff down to and just plop yourself in and have this amazing landscape all to yourself, or nearly all to yourself. So really, really beautiful stuff. But again, for the nerdy folks among us, there's more to see than just, fossilized creatures that you pluck out of the rock yourself, because you can also go to the fossil forest. And this is an area, again, very, very important in sort of scientific history, because what this is it's an ancient forest, probably about 100 million years old, ? And it was a forest that, through sort of a landslide or some sort of changes in the landscape, ended up being completely submerged by seawater in a way that preserved all of the sort of mossy growths and the sort of ancient forest environment. And you can see here, Cat is essentially sitting in a tree stump. So trees 100 million years ago weren't like trees today. They were sort of more like really, really big grasses or really big bamboos. And so this is what was left behind when one of those was sort of fossilized, covered by water that killed everything and then preserved. And again, you can go and explore this on your own. We were the only people there, and just goes on for all along the coast, finding these amazing, fossil remains. Now, my opening slide to this section said weekends only, please. And that's because the fossil forest is in another military firing range. And in fact, to get there, you have to go through a gate that says, in no uncertain terms, if you come through here on a weekend or on a weekday, you might get hit by an artillery shell. So really, please do not do that. So on the weekends, they're not firing artillery shells. You're welcome to come explore it. On weekdays, very, very off limits. But again, the kind of thing that there's loads of people on the beach having their Mr. Whippies. There's nobody up there exploring the fossil forest and seeing all of the amazing stuff that you can see along the Jurassic coast. So definitely check that out. And again, if you're into sort of ye olde British life, every one of the towns along the Jurassic coast is going to have, this sort of really cool old harbor or port where there are still some fishing boats that are going out for the day. This picture was taken sitting from a dockside cafe where you can, again, sip your coffee and have a scone, watch people going out for the day or coming back. And, again, if that type of sort of British life is something you're really interested in, you can go to any one of these and have an experience that's going to be very, very authentic and not designed for tourists. So we've talked about the Dartmoor, we've talked about the Jurassic coast, and then there's all this other area. And there's all these tiny little villages. And you can just sort of pick a village, any village, put your finger on a map and find the nearest village, because you probably aren't going to hit a village, but pick a village at random and go there. What you're going to find is the sort of British village life that we all stereotypically think all the British people live in. You're going to find the village church that has a red phone booth outside of it, but it no longer has a phone in it. Instead, nowadays they have defibrillators for the community to use in the case of someone having a heart attack. You're going to find, like we talked about, this is a village cafe, but it's also the village convenience store and the village post office and the village fabric store and the village gossip, because it's the store in the village. But they're more than happy. They're in fact thrilled and a little confused that you showed up and asked if you could have a scone and a coffee and enjoy just seeing who comes by. And you'll find really neat little niche places like Finch Brothers Edge Tools and Shovel Makers, which is a really cool museum in this random village that told us about the history of making shovels in Dartmoor in the 19th century. So I think you should really think about a trip to this region, not as a, here's the highlights of what you must see, but as a, let's go exploring and find something that no one would have put in one of those highlights guides. And then we can tell everyone about it and feel like we discovered something special. It's a region that's really going to reward that. So briefly, a bit of logistics. Try slow. I stole this from our friend Nate at Break Bread. But this idea of you're going to want to dial it back a few notches on this trip. Don't make Southwest England your first trip to the UK or your first trip to Europe. But if you need to unplug, or you want to go and have a slow trip, where you're settling in somewhere and you're meeting people, you're making relationships, you're exploring, you're not coming in with a big agenda, but instead you're saying, hey, let's go just check out this random village. And if it's, kind of lame, we'll go on to the next one. But you don't need to come in with that top 10 list to work through. I think it's a region that really rewards that. And honestly, it's an area you could come back to over and over again and really just feel like a second home, almost feel very comfortable. As I said, you really need a car. And we made the mistake of getting a VW Polo that had a 70 horsepower engine, which was a little on the skimpy side. And certainly there were a few times where I'm in the lowest gear I can be in and my foot's welded to the floor and we're still slowing down going up a hill. So maybe upgrade just a little bit. Don't be cheap, Colin. Get a slightly more powerful car. But again, you're gonna have to decide you probably don't want a big hulking SUV on those twisty back roads as well. But you're really gonna need a car. And you don't want to stay in a city. I think sometimes people look at a region and they would see Dartmoor and they'd scan around and they say, well, it looks like Exeter or Plymouth are the two big cities here. So I'll go on booking.com and look for a hotel in one of those cities. Don't stay in a city, or even a sort of kind of city, because Plymouth is sort of only a kind of city in that sense. But look for these farm stays, or find a village inn, that has 4 bedrooms and is, attached to the village pub. Look for bed and breakfast. If bed and breakfasts are your thing, there's some amazing opportunities there. Or do the sort of self-catering Airbnb thing. And whether you want to stay in a converted farmhouse like we did, or you want to go a little more rustic and do a sort of glamping, stay in a yurt thing, you're going to have all of those opportunities. But definitely you want to do one of these for your stay. And as I said, like, pick a home base, make that a place you really move into for a week and feel like it's yours and get comfortable, and then do sort of those exploratory day trips out. It's well worth it. Any time of the year, I think, is going to be great in Dartmoor. I say except maybe August, just because as you probably know, August is when all the Europeans and the sort of Europeans, like the British, go on vacation. And so if you're there in August, you might have a bit more tourism. We were actually there in late August, and I never felt like we were almost always just by ourselves out in the world. But August is probably the busiest time of the year in this area. So if you really, really want to avoid crowds, I'd pick a different month. But we talked to some folks there. We were asking these questions about what's it like in winter? What's it like in spring? I think it's going to be amazing any time of the year. Because it sits on this peninsula out in the ocean, it's got some moderating forces coming from the ocean. So although it does snow, it's never going to be like brutally cold. And it also never gets brutally hot. It's just beautiful. And I think it would be beautiful any time of the year. So that is what I've got to talk to you about vis-a-vis Southwest England. I'll jump into your question and answers right now, but your questions, I guess. If you need to sign off, though, the next one of these is going to be May 17th. So they're the third Tuesday of the month, if you're still not sure when they're happening. And we're going to be talking about Mexico City, which it's not just dogs. It's also tacos. So both those things, hopefully very exciting for you. But we just came back from another trip to Mexico City, and it's quickly become one of my favorite cities in the world. So we'll be talking about Mexico City next month. So I have a couple questions. One is, what surprised you most about your trip? Well, I think, I'll say what surprised me about it, the most, I think, was how different it felt. And this sort of applies to all of Britain, I think because they speak English and because we're exposed to, or I'm certainly exposed to a lot of British television, I expected it to feel more like just taking a trip in the US and to have that sort of mentality when I was there. And in reality, it felt, very unique. Some parts felt very European, right? Some parts of England feel very European, but this part of in Southwest England, it was this sort of mashup of like, rural America, right? Going to a small town in Wisconsin is sort of like going to these villages, but and then in ways that just don't exist here, where you've got this sort of intersection of village life and farming life and natural history and industrial uses. And sort of people who are really devoted to that lifestyle, and a government that's putting resources into trying to preserve that lifestyle, right? Trying to make sure these villages don't totally empty out. And so I think I was surprised at just how different it felt in general. And the other question from Anna is, I just want to find fossils. And like, yeah, like that's amazing, right? Like, I will say that there's a geologist I know who I've traveled with before, and occasionally this person, wishes they could take home things that we find when we're out on trips, but they know that you're not allowed to. And so being able to go somewhere where, not only are you like able to go and sit there and find fossils that like no one's ever seen, like you're looking at a creature that no one ever saw, that nothing's seen for 150 million years, right? And no human's ever seen before. Maybe it's some species we don't even know about. And not only did you get to find that and have that sense of discovery when you break open the rock, but then you get to take it home. You may want to bring some like Ziplocs to put them in and keep them very safe when you bring them home. But like that's pretty unique in most of the world. So those are the questions we had in the chat. So, oh, and one more, if you could go there again, are there any places you would want to explore that you get to see? Yeah, I think I'd love to explore more of the coastline as well, especially that northern coastline. I think that, just getting and poking into more seaside villages would be really fun to, again, see how they might be different from the sort of more rural farming villages. I think you get more of that sort of commerce outward facing sense. So I think that'd be really cool. And again, I would be happy to just keep going back there and picking random places and just seeing what's there, seeing what, weird little quirky museum someone's still running, or what amazing landscape you can stumble upon, or other, roadside attractions or anything else. So I think just exploring this area would be super rewarding. It's very compact, very explorable. So with that, I will say thank you all for joining. Super appreciate you all for indulging me in this activity. I hope this got you excited to think about maybe a part of England that you haven't thought about before, or maybe wasn't on your radar. Minneapolis, for those of you in this part of the country, Delta just resumed nonstop flights to London. And if you are, hunting travel deal sites, or you sign up for some of these travel newsletters, you'll occasionally find really cheap seats on those flights. And so, this doesn't have to be I planned all year for a trip kind of thing, but, if you find $300 flights to London, maybe you take a week and fly over there and just camp out in an Airbnb and bring your laptop and work if that's what works for you. But, those opportunities are out there, and I think you should keep this region in the back of your head for a really neat experience. So thank you all so much. I will see you again next month, I hope. And yeah, bye.